I
super.
think we should talk about the hole in
Noah's
Noah's
ceiling.
ceiling.
Oh gosh.
I think we should
This is a
address it.
popular matter of concern, but I promise you guys it's not out of the norm. I'm pretty sure many Canadians have holes in their roofs.
I don't know about that. I think it's a lot less normal than you seem to think it is.
Like,
Look,
I think a mutant possum is going to swoop in on you in the middle of the night through that hole.
Maybe you're gonna wake up with like a little nest of baby raccoons in bed with you.
I don't know. Maybe I haven't thought of raising a family of baby raccoons, but maybe that would be a nice thing. It's perhaps cheaper
Raccoon
than raising an actual kid.
raccoons get a bad rap, but they're like super cute.
I know,
I
but they're
would
full of distemper. No, don't go near them. They'll bite
Yeah,
you,
no,
give
back
you
into a
bad
corner, they'll like
diseases.
rip your face off. I'll pass, but
They fight
thank
like
you.
ninjas. They should join the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Alrighty, are we finished? Do we want to get started on our actual show, guys?
Let's do
Perfect.
it.
Hey, my name is Chris Sims. I'm the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I'm here with two of my very dear friends from True North here for Off the Record, even though we're actually on the internet. Don't ask me, I didn't name the show. So I wanted to get started on electric vehicles, or as a friend of mine liked to call them, battery powered cars, because that's a better mental image. When I picture it, I picture kind of like a toy. So this is the thing. Number one, we're trying to spend a ton of money on these things. Number two, it doesn't seem like people are actually wanting to buy them. And number three, what I find really interesting is now we've done a poll, like a big honkin' national leger poll, and the majority of Canadians don't want this electric vehicle mandate. So as of right now, the Trudeau government is going to ban the sale of normal vehicles, of gasoline and diesel powered vehicles, and even some hybrids, by the way, by the year 2035. So, meaning if you walk yourself over to a car dealership and you want to buy a new vehicle in 10 years' time, which will go by like that, you are going to be forced to buy only a battery powered car. You won't be allowed to buy a gasoline or diesel car. Turns out, survey says more than 60% of those decided say they don't want Trudeau's EV mandate. I did some follow up research on this as well. So, number one, the people don't want it. And then the main thing that I found is, guys, we just don't have the energy for this. Rachel, I don't know if you're still hanging out here in Alberta or if you're busy covering the United States election, but remember in the winter when we're all told not to plug in our hair dryer because we're going to like collapse the grid, but we're all supposed to have electric cars? We do not have the juice for this. We do not have the electricity for this or the money to build new power plants. What are you guys hearing on things like electric vehicles and the fact the government's trying to force them?
Yeah, so I mean, my perspective is similar to yours, a little different in the sense that I do actually really like the idea of an electric vehicle. I think that if it was feasible for me, I would love to have a Tesla. Actually, I was just down in the States. When you ask where I am, I'm a little here, a little there, a little everywhere. I've been on the road basically nonstop for the last few months. But I was just down in Florida and I actually saw the Cybertruck, the Tesla Cybertruck, on two different occasions. And online, it looks like a kind of bizarre looking vehicle. Anyways, saw it in person. I actually thought it was pretty cool. I was like, I could see myself driving around one of those. That looks like an awesome vehicle. I also really admire Elon Musk. I would love to support his business versus, say, Toyota. I currently drive a Toyota. I would love to get one of their little Tacoma trucks as my next vehicle. But Robbie Starbuck, he does really great work, sort of exposing woke companies. And it looks like Toyota Canada is really woke and pushing all this gender nonsense for surgeries for staff, for their staff's kids, for gender reassignment surgeries, which is, let's just say what it is. It's, telling people to chop off their little boys' penises, things like that. So it makes me not want to support those woke, crappy companies. Meanwhile, I could support something like Tesla. So I like the idea of an electric vehicle. I think it would be cool. I want to support Elon Musk's business. That being said, my biggest concern is that living in Alberta primarily, it just doesn't really seem very reasonable for me to be driving an electric vehicle. I've heard that they don't really have the greatest battery length in our cold, cold winters. And I already hate stopping to fuel up. And I only currently have to fuel up like once a week, maybe every 2 weeks right now. So if all of a sudden I'm in a situation where I'm constantly having to think about charging my vehicle, that's just going to drive me nuts. And so for me, I need to be practical. That's the primary thing. I don't want to be spending all this extra time thinking about when I would have to charge my vehicle. And then the other thing that you mentioned is in Alberta, every winter, it seems now we're under threat of rolling brownouts, where the government is telling us we actually don't have enough baseload power. And if you guys don't turn off your hair dryers at home, if you don't turn off your lights at home, we're going to have to start having rolling brownouts across the province where we're actually going to cut your electricity for a few hours to make sure that everyone can have a little electricity and that no one freezes to death essentially because they're out of power for so long. And so for me, I just don't think it's the most practical thing for me to have in Alberta. Maybe that will change in years to come. Maybe the technology will improve so that battery life is a little longer. But even that being said, that is a unique thing. That's my decision. I personally think that the Cybertruck is cool. I think maybe one day I'd like to have one. My mom, on the other hand, she was sitting next to me in the vehicle and she was like, "That's the ugliest truck I've ever seen in my life. It looks absolutely
Very polarizing.
ridiculous." She's not interested. So I think that's important that we have those options in a place like Canada, such a wealthy country. There's no reason that we should be telling people you have to drive that type of vehicle or this one. Canada is an amazing country. We have so much wealth and opportunities here. I think the benefit of living in a place like this is the opportunity and the decisions that we get to make. So no, I'm not really interested in the government telling me what type of vehicle I have to drive. And I don't think other Canadians are either.
Noah,
Yeah.
what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think Rachel brings up some good points in the sense that like we have to consider the practical reality of implementing such a ban. I mean, we do not have the energy required and the capacity to generate such energy in order to support millions upon millions of electric vehicles on our streets. And as it is, we don't even have the infrastructure for your average Canadian to feel comfortable buying an electric vehicle because a lot of the time they're not going to be able to find an electric vehicle charger, especially in more rural parts of the country. And as Rachel mentioned, in more rural and northern parts of the country where it gets quite cold, especially in Alberta. I see you guys getting like -50 in like the middle of February. As an Ontarian, I see those digits. I shrivel up a little bit in fear. But like so do the Teslas and so do the electric vehicles. Their energy capacity, their battery capacity can sometimes diminish by around 30 to even 40%, which if you are buying an electric vehicle or any vehicle for that matter, you need your vehicle to be reliable. You need to reliably able to take your vehicle to work or do work with your vehicle if that's what you are doing. And also just a basic part of reality is that Canadians, they don't want this. And if you're going to force such a ban on Canadians, then you're probably going to not be able to execute such a policy properly. For example, what do you do after the ban goes through and with the all the classic cars and the sort of gas guzzling cars that people have collected? I mean, in the Liberal government's argument, in the Liberal government's worldview, such cars are still contributing to climate change and pollution. So is the government going to come after your classic cars and all your gas power cars next? Furthermore, people are just going to continue to buy used gas powered vehicles because electric vehicles cost more. And especially since we are going through a cost of living crisis in this country, people are more often not going to spend within their means and they are going to buy the used cars, and to the Liberal government's chagrin. So I really believe that this is not only a dumb policy that me and my friends definitely do not like, because we like our gas power cars and we like to hear the engine make loud noises because it's just sort of something like a masculine urge. But like it's a matter of personal choice, freedom, and also practical reality. And the Liberal government, they fail on both of those fronts.
And the money involved in this, if I can just go over some of the numbers. So with the federal government, they're dumping around $30 billion into this, into EV manufacturing and battery manufacturing. And I will point out, these are mega international corporations that do not need taxpayers' funding. They do not need taxpayers' help. We're talking Volkswagen, Ford, tons and tons of these companies. If you add in what the Ontario taxpayer is coughing up, the total now is around $50 billion with a B. To put that into perspective, it costs around $1 billion to build a hospital. So you're picturing 50 hospitals now. If you get into the real numbers, so we found a study from Natural Resources Canada, okay, the federal government itself, out loud with its face, saying that by, I think, 2035, 2040, that this mandate, this forced electric vehicle mandate from the federal government, will cost around $300 billion.
That's insane.
Yeah, we don't have the money for that. And so that number was huge. And so I dug into it more. I'm like, okay, let's get right down to brass tacks. I want megawatts. I want kilowatts. Let's see what this is. And I worked it out. And yeah, it's right. So based on if say we have around 24 million cars and trucks right now in Canada. So I'm talking vehicles that are gasoline powered cars and light duty pickup trucks, not talking about the semi trucks that deliver all of our food. Okay. Just personal cars. 24 million. If we shifted all of those over at midnight in 2035 over to electric, we would need 20 new big nuclear power plants just to power that fleet of vehicles. You do the math? Yeah, that's around $300 billion. So we do not have the energy and we don't have the money to build the energy for this thing. It seems like the Trudeau government didn't really think this through before they went for it. Did we want to move over to the carbon tax here, Rachel?
Well, I think that's another interesting kind of point to raise because it all ties together when we talk about this electric vehicle mandate. The Trudeau government, that isn't the only means that they're pressuring people to move over into electric vehicles. Sure, they have this mandate. They're warning people, you're not going to be able to buy gas powered vehicles. At the same time, they're really trying to price consumers out of being able to afford gas powered vehicles with things like the carbon tax. And we know that this is a hot button issue. It's really what the Conservative Party has made one of their platform policies is affordability centered around the carbon tax. And, it seems that every opportunity one Conservative government or opposition party in the province is trying to kind of bring Canadians' attention back to the carbon tax and the harmful impacts of it again. So we know that the Supreme Court ruled a few years back that it was constitutional when we saw that challenge from a number of provinces. Now New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs is once again renewing that challenge to say that the carbon tax is not constitutional. He's seeking to bring a legal challenge against it once again. And, he's doing this as the province nears an election, so probably trying to remind voters that some of the issues that they're feeling in the pocket, not the problem of his government per se. But this is a little bit of a different challenge than what we've seen in the past. Chris, perhaps you want to go ahead and explain what you've noticed to be different from this challenge versus what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm from British Columbia, but I worked on Parliament Hill for 20 something years. So my experience of the carbon tax has been primarily the provincial version of it. So they have to keep it at the same rate as the federal government, but there's different carve outs and things like that. And so what I find really interesting here is that the New Brunswick government, they're under the yoke of the federal carbon tax. And what they're highlighting, and now I'm hearing Premier Danielle Smith highlighting, is, hey, this isn't just, $13 every minivan or $20 every pickup truck. What about the schools? What about the ambulance fleets? What about the downloaded costs of the carbon tax onto keeping this major infrastructure up and running and heated with the lights on? So here in Alberta, a lot of our electrical power, talk about plugging in your vehicle, a lot of our electrical power comes from natural gas. And so if you have a natural gas bill here in the province of Alberta, you pay a carbon tax. So it's really interesting to hear the language coming out of Higgs and also coming from Premier Smith saying, hey, it's more than just the average person driving or heating their home. You're having a knock-on effect of higher costs here, and we're going to fight you. So we are urging every single premier in every single province to jump in on this fight. We want them elbows up. We want them pushing back against Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's carbon tax. I'm expecting that Premier Danielle Smith and Alberta will jump into this court fight any second now.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Noah.
Well, yeah, and just from a legal perspective, I think that over the past few years, we've seen the Trudeau government undermine the argument for the carbon tax being constitutionally valid insofar as the Supreme Court ruled in part that the carbon tax was justified under the reasoning that the carbon emissions is a matter of national concern, and that provinces individually could not address this issue, and that a federal statute needed to be devised in order to regulate carbon emissions in Canada. But the problem is that if this was a matter of such grave national concern, you wouldn't be giving out carve outs to certain provinces, and you wouldn't be giving out carve outs on certain products, because this is just a matter of grave national concern. And if you are giving out certain carve outs to some people, why not give it to others? If you're giving out carve outs to the Maritimers on their home heating oil, why aren't you giving it out to the Albertans, or why aren't you giving it to the British Columbians or Ontarians? I mean, it is perfectly evident that the carbon tax is something that the federal government is trying to impose as something that is an existential threat, but they're not treating it as an existential threat. They're just treating it as another revenue generating mechanism. And, they're really promoting the idea that you're going to get more money that you put into the carbon tax, even though it's a false notion that has been repeatedly debunked, especially by the parliamentary budget officer. But nonetheless, the Trudeau government still tries to push this line. So I think the Trudeau government, they've definitely undermined the idea that the reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a matter of national concern, and they've undermined the argument that provinces are not capable of doing this, because we see provinces attempting to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in a variety of ways. I mean, Alberta is one of the provinces that talks the most about carbon capture, because they understand the idea that reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a popular sentiment within the Canadian public, and people want to see action on that. So I think that when you see the federal government undermining their own argument on the carbon tax, you're going to have provinces jump on that opportunity, and New Brunswick doing so by taking the government to court is something that I think a lot of Canadians are happy to see.
Rachel?
Very well said, Noah. They're treating it as really a revenue generating stream, and then they're also conveniently treating it as an election issue by carving out these exemptions for certain provinces where it's going to be particularly expensive, particularly unpopular for their MPs. Of course, the Liberals aren't the only one treating it as an election issue. Now we know that NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has come out and says, he doesn't really agree with the carbon pricing regime anymore. I mean, it's just when we talk about disingenuous politicians, like Jagmeet Singh is one of those people who makes me want to go like full black pill. Like, politics is meaningless. None of this matters. Like, he's such a frustrating person. And it's like so ridiculous that he's actually a political leader who has as much sway and is as like much of discussion in the national news scene as he is, because he's like so disingenuous and like so useless at his job. But here we are talking about him once again, because unfortunately, as it currently stands, he's still a newsmaker. And I guess we still have to discuss the things that he says. Even though I don't know that he believes any of it, to be honest. But he said he doesn't support the carbon pricing regime. Now the Liberals are accusing him of falling for conservative propaganda. Obviously, he was just looking at his internal polling. Like, come on. But now the Liberal ministers are offering to meet with him and I guess essentially correct his wrong thing. I don't know. What do you guys make of this? Like, is this to me just is all like the worst type of politics? Like, it's all such meaningless news headlines. You're trying to deceive the people. Like, I just am so sick of these types of stories. Like, I just can't handle this government anymore.
Yeah.
That sounds very black pill. For folks who are watching who don't understand what the heck we're talking about with the black pill, red pill, blue pill, I get this question quite a bit, actually, when we go out amongst normal people and they watch our shows. So a red pill, blue pill, that's from the movie The Matrix. So go back and watch it. Keanu Reeves, it's an amazing movie. And the idea is if you're red pilled, you wake up and you actually see the patterns going on and you see what the government in this case is up to. Blue pill means I'd rather not. I'm just going to stay blissfully unaware and pretend. I think black pill, Rachel, is that you're kind of borderline despair. So I do want to pull you back
Pessimism, yeah.
from the black pill brink.
I think
White pill. What's
not
white?
just
What's
the
white
despair that I feel is like I think what most of Canadians are feeling. Like, I think we have a story about like the fatigue the Canadians are feeling. Like, I'm with you all. Like, I just cannot handle the fake news headlines that like actually have no impact on our lives. Like, things not improving. People like Jagmeet Singh pulling their supply confidence agreement, but they're really not pulling it. Like, they're never going to have an election. I think Noah, you can speak more to this about Canadians' fatigue. Like, I'm right there with you, with the rest of you. Like, this is just tiring. Parliament's clearly not working. Like, when we get to this place in politics, which does happen, I would say every few years, maybe even every decade, if we want to be generous, where the people who are elected to represent us just can no longer work together. And there's just so much friction and so much disagreement. And it feels like such a toxic place. Like, it really just is time for an election. That we don't have to stay in this place. But I think the place that I'm in, and the sort of the despair and the discouragement that I'm feeling about our political scene is like the natural things that happens in a political cycle. And I think it's like something a lot of people are feeling right now.
Yeah, I think so. After about 10 years, usually a government starts to, loses popularity and luster. But even the Trudeau government is really, really pushing it when it comes to just how unpopular they are. And Jagmeet Singh is definitely not helping. It's funny because Jagmeet Singh in title is the leader of the NDP, but he's anything but a leader. I mean, he is the definition of a follower. I mean, if you go back and listen to Jagmeet Singh when he was first becoming the leader of the NDP, he gave this interview where he basically said before he was getting into politics, he had to, pick and choose, ordering off a menu, which political party he was going to join. Should I join the Conservatives, the Liberals, the NDP? I'm not sure. And then, let's pick for like you're ordering at a restaurant. It's like, do you have no values? Do you just like go wherever the wind is blowing? And on the matter of the carbon tax, he has not been a leader on this issue at all. He just follows the Trudeau government with their carbon tax regime, and then he's following other NDP leaders who are saying, "Hey, the carbon tax is not working out for us." During the Alberta NDP leadership contest, you've had several leadership contestants that have said that, "Hey, maybe the carbon tax isn't such a good idea." You start to see Premier David Eby start to tone his rhetoric down on the carbon tax. You also have other NDP leaders like Wab Kinew, who is also not totally in favor of a carbon tax. And you have plenty of other premiers who are not in favor of carbon tax. And Jagmeet Singh is just following the Canadian sentiment and believes that, hey, supporting the carbon tax a few years ago was politically favorable for me, and now it's not. So now I'm not going to support the carbon tax. He shows no leadership whatsoever, and he just follows other people. That's why the Canadians have had to deal with this Trudeau government for as long as we've had, because he doesn't have the stones in order to call for an election and basically take some leadership and try and take his message to the Canadian people and try and get elected on that basis. But he has no real message to deliver to the Canadian people because he's a hollow husk of a man.
If you wanted to follow an NDP leader on the issue of the carbon tax, he could crack open his very recent party history books. And the late former leader of the federal NDP, Jack Layton, was opposed to the carbon tax. He said so repeatedly. You can go back and find it. It's a Globe and Mail article. It's from 2008. He said very clearly that it is unfair to punish people in a big, cold country like Canada for heating their homes. And then it's also really unfair to make certain items more expensive because you know what? Ding, ding, ding. It'll hurt poor people and the working
Absolutely.
class the most. And he was bang on the nose on that. In fact, I'm old enough to remember I booked him for the show to talk about stuff like this. So we talked about it. So he can go back to the OG stance on the carbon tax of the NDP, which was against it. In fact, you mentioned David Eby. The original British Columbia NDP, when the carbon tax was first hatched in North America, in British Columbia, in 2008, they opposed the carbon tax so much, they ran a campaign on it during the election. The campaign slogan, I kid you not, was Axe the Tax. It's amazing how, if you wait around long enough, the same old thing comes back into vogue. I did want to raise this issue of Guilbeault's new, I don't know what you would call it, re-education camp or something that he's offering people on the carbon tax. But before we do that, to your point on how much money this thing brings in, I went in and dug through the federal budget, which, by the way, is a dumpster fire. It's terrible. Provincial budgets, very clear. Almost all math, almost all graphs. There is so much filler in the federal budget. It's almost impossible to pull up the actual stats, but I found it. So the carbon tax this year in Canada will pull in close to $13 billion federally into federal government coffers. But get this, So you guys have both read budget documents. You know how you can find like the revenue, right? And
Yep.
you go along the line item. And
Yep.
usually you could look for something like carbon tax or carbon levy.
Mhm.
This is what the Trudeau government called it as their line item. I'm going to read it. Quote, pollution pricing proceeds to be returned to Canadians, end quote.
That's
Like,
what
Well,
they're calling the
Chris, they
tax.
need that $13 billion to buy tampons for men. So it's like totally fair. I'm so
You know,
glad they have my money for that. Like,
but
honestly.
it's insane how like so many bodies are just trying to like do this revisionist history thing of like, oh, the carbon tax is not actually a tax. Like the Supreme Court, for example, ruled that it's not a tax, it's a regulatory levy. Oh, wow.
ooh, boogie
Big
boogie.
difference here, bro. It's not
Sort
really,
of like
actually.
how in Alberta there was no vaccine mandate, it was like a vaccine exemption passport pass or something. It's like all it's just like it's just a fancy euphemism for being
Yeah,
exactly what you think it
it's
is.
it's ultimately just deception. Like it's just deceiving the Canadian people on what it actually is, and like it's kind of funny to read how absurd the calling it whatever you said, Chris. But
Pollution pricing proceeds to be returned to Canadians.
yeah, like that's kind of funny,
Say that 10 times
but
fast.
but it's kind of dark in the sense that
I
like
know. Give
like
me that
like
black pill
governments
bottle.
are just so blatantly trying to deceive you and lie to your face that it's insane. And obviously that does not take into consideration all the administrative costs it requires on behalf of Revenue
Oh, yeah.
Canada and stuff in order to administer the carbon tax. So you're actually paying more for the carbon tax, if you account for the bureaucracy. But the federal government's obviously not going to tell you that.
No, and don't forget the tax on tax. Sorry
Yep.
to really shove that black pill further down your throat, Rachel, but we pay the tax on tax. So we do the carbon tax and then they add the GST after. So we're paying a
Yeah.
tax on the carbon tax and it is hundreds of millions of dollars. This is not a couple of nickels here and there. It is huge money. Can we pull up that I think we have the letter. Is this a letter? Did the environment minister actually send this to Jagmeet Singh? Whoever wants to take this away, you can go ahead and read it.
I do not want to read it. I'll just put that out there.
Okay, no, fair enough. So my understanding is this comes from the environment minister, Stéphane Guilbeault, who, by the way, was not at the announcement when they announced the carve out for home heating oil. I'll just point that out there. He was one of the few cabinet ministers that wasn't there. So this is his sternly worded letter. I think it's 3 pages that he sent to Jagmeet Singh, because all Jagmeet Singh did, which was interesting, was muse out loud of perhaps it's no longer a good idea to put the burden of the carbon tax onto the back of working people. And it resulted in this letter. So the Liberals are big mad about losing a bit of ground on the carbon tax. And they're so upset and so big mad that they're going to send a strongly worded letter to Jagmeet Singh saying, you really need to fall back in line on the carbon tax. But I don't think that's going to happen. When you have someone as strident, a carbon tax cheerleader, as NDP leader / premier David Eby, now saying, oh, well, if the feds get rid of theirs, their backstop, their mandatory one, we'll get rid of the consumer carbon tax in British Columbia. Like a few months ago, it was the same sorts of people in British Columbia, not him himself, because I can't find the quote, but the same crowd would call you horrible things for saying we shouldn't have a carbon tax in BC. They would accuse you of, not caring about Lytton. They would call you a climate change denier, which, by the way, is a disgusting term and people shouldn't put up with it. So now all of a sudden, it's too expensive for people because people can't afford food, they can't afford rent, and they can't afford to heat their homes or to drive to work in BC. It is so unaffordable in that province. The carbon taxes are a big reason why. And now all of a sudden, David Eby is saying, you know what, maybe we should get rid of it. If he is seeing the light and saying, you know what, maybe this is a big deal, I think it's just a matter of time before we actually do get Mr. Singh saying, you know what, we can't do this anymore. Because you're right, Rachel, they would have seen internal polling. They read the newspapers. They read the editorial section. They get letters and emails, hello, all the time. And I think they're eventually just going to crack on this. Did we want to move on to your issue here, Noah? I don't even know about this. So it's
Yeah.
the SDTC documents that you've got. What's going on there?
Yeah, so just some background. About a year ago, it was revealed that this Crown Corporation, Sustainable Development Technology Canada,
Okay.
their board of directors and their executives has basically been engaging in misconduct and corporate mismanagement. Some could even say corruption regarding with how taxpayer funds were being used. For example, they were giving out hundreds of millions of dollars to companies that they were associated with, either companies that they had investments in, whether it's companies that they had connections with, whether that they worked at such a company or they have friends that work there. And ultimately, the ethics commissioner and the auditor general found gross mismanagement and misconduct. They found that the board, several board of directors had violated the Conflict of Interest Act. And I have done some reporting on this matter where I basically found that one of the board of directors, her name's Annette Verschuren, she had basically invested in about 13 of the companies that SDTC had given money to, and what that's hundreds of millions of dollars, or grants in the tens of thousands of dollars. So SDTC has been going through the ringer. Their president had to step down. Several of their board of directors had to step down. Their board of directors has pretty much been wiped out, and the federal government has decommissioned SDTC as it stands because the corruption just goes so deep, and it is pretty much you can't salvage this crown corporation. So the opposition, as they are doing their job, they have requested documents from the Trudeau government. They basically requested all of the financial records of SDTC, the funding agreements that they had with the federal government because they had violated many of the funding agreements with the federal government. And also they wanted correspondence, meeting notes amongst the board of directors, et cetera, et cetera. And they wanted to hand those documents over to the RCMP. The House of Commons, they have the absolute power to request documents from the federal government so long as it's not a matter of national security concern. However, the Trudeau government has basically defied Parliament and basically said that they are above the law, that they will not be handing over these documents. And the Speaker of the House of Commons, a Liberal MP, Greg Fergus, has ruled that yes, the Trudeau government is in contempt of Parliament and they ought to hand over those documents to the opposition, who will then hand over those documents to the RCMP. The Speaker is going to urge the Conservative Party to pass a motion in Parliament to get the matter studied in committee first, but the Conservatives are under no obligation to do this. So it seems as if the Liberals are very, very concerned at covering up their scandals and the basically corruption that has been rife in their government. We also seen this attempt when they tried to take the Speaker to court over the National Microbiology Laboratory. So it just seems like they just have a contempt for openness and transparency, the openness and transparency that they campaigned on in 2015. What do you guys think about this story?
That
Well,
is great work, Noah.
more than having contempt for openness and transparency, they have a contempt for Canadians. They're taxing Canadians to death. Money's flying out the door. Money is rolling out of the door faster than it ever has. And it's going to friends of people in the Liberal government, friends of people on these crown corporations, family of people on these crown corporations. It's just so exhausting to listen to these types of stories time and time again. Why are the people responsible here not being prosecuted? They should be being criminally prosecuted for stealing money from Canadians, but we never see that. They at best get a slap on the wrist, but people who are, commit these types of crimes, steal money from Canadians, improperly award contracts to friends and family, they're never actually held to account in this country anymore.
That is great work, Noah. So I had been following this, so now I remember this is all the major committee work that's been going on, trying to drag these documents out of this Crown Corporation. I've been in the game for a long time, and I was there during the so-called sponsorship scandal. I was covering it on Parliament Hill, an ad scam. This would have been all over the place. Like, this would have been front page news every single day for weeks on end, people chasing cabinet ministers down the hall with live cameras rolling, shouting questions at them. This is huge. And to now see, I think this is now to your point, this is, I think, the second time I have seen the speaker, who's a liberal, say, no, you must cough this up. You are in contempt of the House of Commons, contempt of Parliament, unless you cough up this information. And to see the Liberal government refusing. So, again, I think this is the second time I've seen this in a couple of years, and I don't remember ever seeing it before. We've had some big dust-ups in the House of Commons over the time. The mace was grabbed at one point when people were getting pretty rowdy in there, but not like this. So good on you for keeping track of this. From what I can tell, it's largely the Conservatives driving the bus on this in the committee. Or is the NDP, do we know, not to spring you on this, is the NDP and Bloc chiming in on this in committee saying, yeah, you better cough up these documents? Sometimes they do team up.
Yeah, they are piling on the Liberals on this, and good on the
Good.
NDP and the Bloc. It seems like one of those stories that they don't have such an ideological connection to. Although this is a crown corporation that is giving money to sort of green technology corporations, so I kind of would have thought the NDP would be a little more skittish on taking the Liberals to town on this, but they are, and credit to the NDP on this. But the NDP, they feel like they have only a few issues in which they could press the Liberals on, and the other ones, all the important matters, they have to support them. But at least they're doing something. I don't want to trash on them every single time I talk.
No, it's good that they're chiming in on committee, because that's how you actually get these things put forward. And the fact that both the Auditor General, you said, and the Ethics Commissioner have
Yep,
already
both of
ruled on
them.
this, huge. This is huge. Thank you for covering this. Rachel, did you want to bring up, you had a poll that you wanted to raise here?
There's one last story that we have for you guys today, and I think that it's a good and a positive note to end the show on. There's been a lot of heavy
Great.
material, been a lot of negativity, blackpilling, if you will. But here, take a look at this. Shows from this story about Canadians shows that most Canadians do not like being called settlers. Surprise, surprise. You were born here, I was born here. Maybe you immigrated here legally and got Canadian citizenship. You don't want to be called a settler. No surprise there. I don't want to be called a settler. And sure, we could talk about the negative aspects of the story that we even have to have these discussions. But I think it's a positive thing that Canadians agree that this is really just silly, that we should be expected to call ourselves settlers when we've lived here, and in many cases for multiple generations in our families. And I think the positive part of this story is that I think that there's sort of like a conservative awakening happening across the country in a variety of ways. I mean, in one regard, people are really feeling the disastrous economic policies of the Liberal government. Likewise, they are in the States. They're really feeling the pinch at the pumps or when they go to buy groceries. And so people are sort of looking for solutions. And I think in many cases, that's causing them to say, you know what, next time there's an election, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring for Pierre Poilievre. Or even though I don't like him personally, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump in the November election. But at the same time, I think conservatives are becoming much more vocal and forthright, and they're becoming a lot more confident and courageous and willing to speak their mind on these important things. When I was in university, I felt like there was really not a voice for conservatives. I was at a very liberal university, and conservative voices were being so silenced and stymied at the time, and I just didn't seem like we had a lot of strong conservative voices, especially in Canada. I think Dr. Jordan Peterson was really one of those first voices that came out, and for many years, we had a very weak conservative party that didn't really take strong stances on things like gender ideology and immigration, and they're only now seeming to get their foothold in that. And so, as much as things are really bad with our government and we have a lot of really bad policies, I think that writ large, common sense, good people across the country are waking up and saying, enough of this nonsense. We're tired of it. We're going to vote for something different the next time around, and we're going to be courageous in how we speak about these things. And we're not going to be fearful of what people might think about us for speaking the truth anymore. And I think that's a really positive thing for the country. And, I'm grateful that, I'm grateful to be a young person at a time when we're sort of seeing this awakening, if you will, across the country and across North America. And I don't think it's too late to save Canada. I don't think it's too late to save North America, but certainly the direction people vote in the next elections will matter quite a bit.
Noah?
Yeah, I think it's great that people don't are rejecting the label of settler. The settler label has a very particular sort of implication, and it's a negative implication. It implies that you existing in Canada as a Canadian is some sort of moral, abomination of sorts. Like, you really shouldn't be here. You're just a settler, and in an ideal world, you would give your land back to the people who rightfully own it. Now, this is a particularly interesting view of the world because conquest happens all the time. I'm not saying conquering other peoples and you know everything that comes with that is a particularly good thing, but it happens. And a civilization was established on the land in which the indigenous people did inhabit and continue to inhabit, and it's a particularly good civilization, and we should look to preserve and protect Canadian civilization, because at the end of the day, if we get rid of Canada, what is there really going to be? Nothing that can replace Canada is going to be better than what we have right now. Obviously, Canada can improve and get better. We all acknowledge the problems and faults that this country has, but at the end of the day, I don't know about you guys, but there's no really other country that I'd prefer living in. So I think that Canadians rejecting the settler label is a good thing, especially since it's a derogatory term. I mean, like that'd be like an ethnic minority accepting the slurs that they get hurled at them. It's kind of ridiculous for Canadians to roll over. And you do have a lot of white Canadians, especially, that are inflicted with white guilt, and they believe that because of their skin color that they are inherently oppressors, and therefore they have to do everything in their power in order to accommodate minorities. But that is the wrong view of the world, and I'm sure that the two of you understand that. I think that as more and more Canadians sort of recognize the need for a cohesive national identity that unites one another, that we're going to start to see the rejection of wokeism that just serves the purpose to divide us on identitarian grounds. So I think Canadians, as Rachel said, are starting to awaken to their Canadianness, and want to be able to conserve the society that our forefathers and our constitutional forefathers had erected back in 1867.
We get a lot of emails at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and they're becoming increasingly more, what could I say, upsetting, concerned, because people just can't make it. Like, they just can't make it. We have more than half of Canadians now are within $200 every month of not being able to make their minimum payments on their bills. And I'm talking minimum payments. Like, you're not paying off a credit card. You're making minimum payments in order just to barely keep your lights on. We now also have record demand from coast to coast at food banks. The sharpest increase that the volunteers there are seeing are from what they call working families. What that means, if you picture it, a working family, is that parents who are holding down jobs are still counting on jars of donated peanut butter to feed their kids.
That's
That's where
insane.
we're at. And we hear from people from, I'm telling you, every walk of life. Every walk of life. They could be brand new Canadians, they could be seventh generation, they could be First Nations Canadians, you name it. And they are really, really hurting. And that's our message, is that we need lower taxes, less waste, and more accountable government in order to give people their lives back so that they can afford these things. There was a gentleman who made a really good recommendation to me a few months ago, and it was about taxes. It's about money. Picture what lands in your bank account. Say you get paid your salary every 2 weeks. Say it automatically is deposited. Picture that number doubling, that amount doubling. That's basically how much taxes take from you all the time. Picture what you could do with that money. Could you afford to save up for a down payment? Could you pay off
Noah
your
could get his
car?
roof fixed.
Noah could get his roof fixed. Could you afford better food for your kids? And so that's why whenever I hear divisive language like this, it almost, you know what? It almost always comes from a very rich person in an ivory tower coming from academia who frankly isn't lining up for donated jars of peanut butter. So that's just been my experience, that this sort of need and this sort of desire for freedom and lower taxes and more prosperity is universal. And so that's what it just hurts when I hear divisive language like that. And so that's the kind of message we're hearing from the Taxpayers Federation supporters all the time. People are getting really to the end of their rope. And I just wanted to encourage them that we've seen bad times before. Canadians have seen bad times before. There is always hope. Okay, people will eventually have enough of this and they will change. They will absolutely change. Just giving you a little bit of trace back to what we were seeing with cracks in the hull of the NDP on the carbon tax. If you see someone as ideologically wedded to something like the carbon tax, like Premier David Eby is, cracking under the pressure, that's because he's hearing from you. That's because he's hearing from the people who are lining up for jars of peanut butter. So I just wanted to give people a little bit of the white pill. Is that the term I should use here, Rachel? To give them a bit of hope that they can and do change. We have seen really tough times in Canada before, and I truly believe that things are going to get better. I think that things are going to improve. Folks, thank you so much for watching. Thank you both, Rachel and Noah, for your contributions to this show. And remember, everything is off the record. Very good, guys. Good job.
I like the hope and optimism at the end there, you know? Like, we're just pounding people for the first 35 minutes, and then
They do need hope. They do.